questions without notice, and give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In January of this year, a record 125,410 visa holders arrived in Australia, far outstripping the housing stock available here in our country. Prime Minister, given permanent and long-term overseas arrivals are outpacing the construction of new homes at a rate of almost 4 to 1, can the Prime Minister tell the House how many new homes or units were built in January?
Call to order. Give a call to the member for Hume. Will cease interjecting immediately. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And I'm asked a question about migration. And indeed, just last week, the Centre for Population put out a population forecast which showed that Australian population is now expected to be smaller in 2030-31 than the pre-pandemic forecast published by the former government when this bloke here was the minister, when he was the Cabinet Minister responsible for migration. Here's what the population statement said. For 2030-31, the expected population is 600,000 people, or 2.1%, below what was projected prior to the onset of the pandemic in 2019-2020. But it's not just when he was the minister, Mr Speaker, because this is what the Leader of the Opposition has said with his current title of Leader of the Opposition. He has said this on the 2nd of September 2022. We do need an increase in the migration numbers.
Order. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Minister for Industry will cease interjecting. And I'll hear from the member for Deakin on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The question asked the Prime Minister how many homes were built in January. Order. If he's unable to answer that question, he should sit down.
The Leader of the House.
Speaker, it's become a practice now from those opposite to stand up taking a point of order, to not nominate any standing order, at all that they think is being breached. And in previous parliaments, when it's got to this point, there have been times where the Speaker has simply insisted that at the start someone has to nominate what standing order they're raising, because otherwise it's just being used as extra speeches.
Order. I think we'll sort this out one way or the other. Moving forward, if you don't get up and say what the standing order, you'll leave the chamber immediately. So just that everyone's crystal clear. No more coming to the dispatch box, giving a speech, asking a question. Under the standing orders, there is one time to take a point of order on relevance. It's pretty easy to do. You simply just get up and say, I'm taking my point of order on relevance. So this is the warning shot. So if it is happening more and more, question time's not going to operate like that. If you do that, you won't stay. Prime Minister in continuation.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And of course, he didn't say it just once. He went on to say this in October 2022. In addition to a domestic workforce, of course, we need migration. We need migration. It wasn't a stutter, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Not a stutter. It was a repeat of how important it was, just to emphasise it. And then in his first budget reply, because there was no policy there at all, he said this: I brought in record numbers of people. Boasting he was, Mr Speaker, boasting. But it wasn't just him, Mr Speaker. The Deputy Leader said this: we know the urgently needed business needs a workforce, and much of that workforce needs to come from overseas. That's what they had to say. The Shadow Minister for Immigration went on to say, we need to get our international students back. We need to get our working holiday visa holders back. They're out there, the whole of their front bench. They're out there saying, we need more people. We need more people. And of course, that's before I have time to go through the wrecked migration program with that troika which were there,
The Treasurer will cease interjecting.
from Dr Parkinson, of course from Christine Nixon and from Dennis Richardson, all showing what a failed migration system looks like under those opposite. Well, we're getting on with fixing it with a minister who actually has a migration policy.
Order. There is far too much noise. The Treasurer and the member for Hume can cease their dialogue across the chamber. That will assist greatly. Give a call to the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Health. What actions has the Albanese Labor government taken to make medicines cheaper for Australians while supporting a strong community pharmacy sector? What obstacles have been overcome to ensure that Australians with ongoing health conditions have access to cheaper medicine?
We're not going to have commentary during questions. That's not starting up. So we're going to do this the right way. The member for Gilmore will start her question again. She'll be heard in silence without any interruption, and then we'll hear from the minister. The member for Gilmore will start her question again.
My question is to the Minister for Health. What actions has the Albanese Labor government taken to make medicines cheaper for Australians while supporting a strong community pharmacy sector? What obstacles have been overcome to ensure that Australians with ongoing health conditions have access to cheaper medicines?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Gilmore for her question because, like everyone on this side of the House, she has no higher priority than helping her community on the South Coast with the cost of living, helping her community earn more through strong wages growth, and helping them keep more of what they earn through tax cuts that this government will deliver to every single taxpayer on July 1st, Mr Speaker. And she also promised her community cheaper medicines, Mr Speaker. We've delivered on that promise as well. We cut the maximum yearly medicines bills for pensioners and concession card holders, meaning around 2 million Australians right now are paying up to 25% less for their medicines every year. Last year we delivered the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS, meaning that general patients are paying around $20 million less for their medicines every single month. And around 200 common medicines, Mr Speaker, are now available for 60 days' supply at the cost of a single script, saving patients time and saving them even more money. Now, of course, the opposition voted against those cheaper medicines measures, and they said the sky would fall in if we proceeded with them. But instead, Mr Speaker, I'm happy to report the number of applications to open a new pharmacy has been 50% higher since we announced that measure than the same period before. And I am delighted about that, Mr Speaker, because our government wants cheaper medicines and a strong community pharmacy sector, a pharmacy sector in strong financial health, delivering even more services to Australian patients. And that's why I'm also delighted that 3,000 pharmacies so far have signed up to become providers of the National Immunisation Program since we allowed them to do that since January 1. And, Mr Speaker, that's why I'm also delighted that we signed a heads of agreement with the Pharmacy Guild last week for a new community pharmacy agreement to start in July, delivering cheaper medicines, better patient outcomes and a strong community pharmacy sector, underpinned by an investment from this government of up to an additional $3 billion, which we're able to do because of the strong budget management of this government and this Treasurer. Now, Mr Speaker, this was a robust negotiation, no doubt about that. No doubt about that. And there's nothing wrong with that. We know that those opposite would have given in at the first hint of pressure. They would have wilted like a daffodil in a stiff summer breeze and left patients high and dry, paying more for their medicines, just like they did over that long decade. Well, that's not our approach, Mr Speaker. We were determined to get an outcome that was good for community pharmacy, but also good for patients. And that is what we did last week.
Order. Give a call to the honourable member for Lindsay.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. This government promised Australians a $275 cut on their electricity bill by 2025. But households in my electorate of Lindsay are owed $1,027 cut to deliver on this promise. Today's release of draft regulated prices for electricity confirm this government's failure to deliver, with annual bills in Western Sydney up 37% on early 2022. Will the minister admit this promise will never be delivered?
Order. The member for O'Connor will cease interjecting. Order. Members on my left, give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Appreciate it, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question. And what the announcement by the Australian Energy Regulator today shows is that energy prices are stabilising and falling after the biggest energy crisis the world has seen in 50 years. And I would have thought, Mr Speaker, I would have thought that is welcome news for the House. Welcome news for the House. Now, nobody should underestimate the cost of living pressures that the Australian people are under, and the need to be constantly vigilant to do more to help Australians with those cost of living pressures, including when it comes to energy prices. But it is a welcome fact that the honourable member's constituents who are on the Ausgrid network, on the Endeavour Energy network, Mr Speaker, would have received a residential reduction in prices of up to 7%, and small businesses on the Endeavour network, which covers the honourable member's electorate, receive a reduction of 4.4%. Now, that's a good thing, Mr Speaker, and we welcome it, while recognising that there is much, much more work to do. Now, this is a result, Mr Speaker, of several things. These announcements today by the Australian Energy Regulator are a result of several events. They're the result of the coal and gas caps that have been put in place by this government, which those opposite voted against. So they are the result of reducing international pressure. We pointed to the international pressure when prices went up. We point to the international changes when prices go down. They are the result of getting more renewables into the grid, Mr Speaker, because renewables are the cheapest form of energy. Always sets them off, but it's true. And it's also the result of a request by myself as the federal minister, supported by state ministers, to the energy regulator to prioritise the needs of consumers, which overturned a previous request from the former Minister for Energy, the former member for Kooyong, Mr Speaker, changing that direction to the Australian Energy Regulator, and that has been reflected in the results today. And these are all positive developments and a welcome development in the face of ongoing pressures.
The minister will pause. Has the minister concluded his answer? The member for Lindsay on a point of order.
Point of order on relevance. I specifically asked, will the minister admit his promise of $275?
The minister is being very relevant with his answer regarding the question he was asked about prices, about the updating the House on why he believes the prices are the way they are. I can appreciate there was a part of the question that the member wants, but he can deal with the entirety of the question. That's what he's doing. The minister has 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do appreciate the sensitivities of those opposite who voted against the coal and gas caps, voted against the energy rebates that were in the budget, which provided support to millions of households, Mr Speaker. I also understand the sensitivity of those opposite because this is the default market offer. The draft that was released today, that was released in accordance with the law, released openly and transparently. I did not sign a regulation to hide it. I did not instruct the Australian regulator today not to release it. It is possible to do such a thing, Mr Speaker. It has been done in the past. The former Minister for Energy signed such a regulation on the 31st of March 2022, which I tabled, Mr Speaker, signed by the member for Hume, instructing the Australian Energy Regulator not to release a 20% increase in power prices just days before the last federal election, which was a very dishonourable thing to do for the honourable member.
Order. The House comes through. There's far too much noise from both sides of the chamber, so we're just going to take the temperature down. Give the call to the member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on cost of living relief and making healthcare more accessible and affordable after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Let's give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Swan for her question and for hosting me regularly in her wonderful seat in Perth, because she knows that making healthcare more affordable is one of the key elements of this government's plan. Making it more accessible is part of our plan for a better future, and that's why we've rolled out 58 urgent care clinics right around the country. That's why there'll be more included in our budget coming up in May. That's why the centrepiece of our last budget was tripling our investment in bulk billing, the largest ever increase in support for the Medicare system since Medicare was introduced. But the other element, of course, which the Health Minister has presided over, is the important reform of making medicines cheaper. First, we had the policy that we announced during the election campaign of a reduction from $42.50 down to $30 that came in on January 1. Now, since then, that has resulted in savings of around about $300 million. But there's more, Mr Speaker, because our historic 60-day prescription policy has already saved Australians $12 million between September and January alone. Most importantly as well, it means less trips to the doctor. It means less trips to the pharmacy. It means that people can get the care that they need for those regular prescriptions that they need, be it for diabetes or heart conditions, so that they can have that certainty of the availability of 60-day prescriptions. And importantly, there is now broad support for 60-day prescriptions, including from community pharmacies. The only people who are still opposing 60-day prescriptions are those opposite. Who say we want people to go to the doctor twice as often, we want them to pay twice as much, and we want them to be so inconvenienced. Now, we're supporting as well pharmacists to deliver more primary care services, something spoken about by those opposite but never delivered. What this is about is making sure that it's easier for Australians to get the care they need when they need it. Taking action on cost of living on health care, together with our tax cuts that come in on July 1 for every taxpayer, together with cheaper childcare, together with the 300,000 fee-free take places that commenced last year, together with our energy price relief plan that has had a positive impact. All of them opposed by those opposite. An opposition bereft of any ideas or any...
Before I call the member for Curtin, I'd like to do some acknowledgements. Present in the Southern Gallery today are representatives from the government's 2023 Youth Advisory Group, and present in the Southern Gallery today are members of the Blacktown Community Leaders Forum and guests of the Minister for Communications, and I see Malcolm McCarris AO in the gallery. Welcome to you all. Give the call to the member for Curtin.
This is a question for the Prime Minister. You've said you'll make political donations transparent, ban lies in political ads and reduce financial influence in elections. The next election's looming. Given the high public interest in this issue, will the Parliament and the public have an opportunity to comment on an exposure draft, or will we be presented with a bill by the major parties that's designed to lock out political competition?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
With respect to the member for Curtin, I say to the member for Curtin that the lobbying on this issue has not been exclusively from people in the major parties. And if the member for Curtin wants me to talk about some of the lobbying that's going on, including from crossbenchers, I'm happy to do so. I'm happy to do so, member for Curtin, because one of the issues that does need transparency is the issue of political donations. We have had a long position in the Labor Party, something that was overturned by the former government, something that goes back to the period of the Hawke and Keating governments, indeed, that was then overturned by the Howard government. Then there was reforms under the Labor government, then those overturned further on. We are consulting very broadly, including with members and representatives of the crossbench, and the minor parties, as well as across the major parties, to see if reform, as proposed by the Minister Farrell, can receive very broad support. Because one of the objectives that we have here is to land reform that stays, not reform that comes and then goes with changes of government. My view has been very clear that there needs to be transparency when it comes to political donations, that there needs to be a stopping. To give just one example of the sort of largesse that we saw from Clive Palmer during the last two election campaigns. I don't think it is tenable. I don't think it is tenable at all to have the sort of dollars washing around the system such as occurs in the United States. I think that is unhealthy. I think it undermines our democracy, and I think that, though I make no apologies for the fact that we will engage, as I have engaged with the member for Curtin and other crossbenchers at meetings that have been held about these issues. I'll continue to do so. Senator Farrell, as the minister, will continue to make himself available to see if we can indeed entrench greater support for our democracy. I realise that in a whole range of ways, in this, the use of social media, there are a range of changes in technology and changes in practice that are undermining faith in our democracy. That is something we've been determined to do. We promised to have a National Anti-Corruption Commission up and running. We did that. We did that in record time, promised previously by former governments, delivered by this government, consistent with our approach of cleaning up politics.
Give the call to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering more support for Australian families? What has been the response to Labor's paid parental leave reforms?
Call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Boothby for the question. From day one, this government has been working hard to improve paid parental leave for working families. First, we made the changes from the 1st of July 2023 to give more families access to the payment, make it more flexible to support parents in the transition back to work, and make it much easier for parents to share care by creating a single payment that both parents can access. Now, this week we took another significant step forward. With the successful passage of our legislation in the Parliament, we are delivering the largest expansion of paid parental leave since Labor established this back in 2011. Now, by expanding the scheme to a full 6 months by 2026, families will receive an extra 6 weeks of paid leave following the birth or adoption of their child when fully rolled out. And that is over $5,000 more to help with the family budget. But, Speaker, we are not stopping there. The Albanese government has recently announced that we will pay superannuation on the government paid parental leave scheme. Now, paying super on the government paid parental leave scheme will help normalise paid parental leave as a workplace entitlement, just like annual leave, sick leave, and reduce the impact of taking parental leave on retirement incomes. Now, many people have called for this, and have welcomed this announcement. Of course, the Women's Economic Equality Task Force has provided their report to the government, and they made this a key recommendation. Of course, Chief Executive Women said paying super on paid parental leave is a huge milestone for women. The Business Council of Australia called it the right thing to do for both women and the economy. The Parenthood said this is a game changer for families across Australia. The Financial Services Council said it would increase the financial and well-being of Australian women. The CPA Australia said paying super on paid parental leave was well worth it. And the ACTU, of course, called it a historic step. Now, amongst all this positivity about our super announcement, it was disappointing that the first instinct from those opposite was to express negativity and reservation on our positive plan. Now, this is not surprising, considering this is those opposite called women of Australia, the mums of Australia, double dippers when they dared to take their leave provided by their workplace and the government-paid parental leave scheme. Well, this government is standing up for working women, and we hope those opposite will too.
Concluded. Order. Give a call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. The latest national accounts confirm that Australia is in an entrenched per capita recession or a family recession. At the same time, disposable income per person, living standards, have collapsed by 7.5% under Labor. Right now, population growth is the only thing left driving the economy. Treasurer, why are hard-working families paying the price for this government's failed economic management?
Call to the order. Give the call to the Treasurer.
And your questions.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To those of you watching at home who thought that the Shadow Treasurer had been replaced, the good news, particularly for me, is that he hasn't. The member for Hume has survived the reshuffle on those opposite, not that you would know, Mr Speaker. That is the second question I've got in about 7 months, and so I'm pleased for the opportunity to be able to answer it. The Shadow Treasurer asked me about economic management, and I am absolutely delighted to get a question from him about economic management, because it gives me the opportunity to explain to him and to the House and to the country the progress that has been made in cleaning up the mess that he and his colleagues on the front bench over there left behind. If we take, for example, real wages, Mr Speaker, real wages are growing again in our economy. They were going backwards 3.4% when we came to office, and now they're growing again ahead of schedule. When we came to office, Mr Speaker, quarterly inflation was 3 times higher than it is now. It's now a third of what those opposite left behind, Mr Speaker. When it comes to productivity, we've had a couple of welcome quarters of productivity growth in the national accounts that the Shadow Treasurer references, Mr Speaker.
Order.
And so the point is, Mr Speaker, the point is, I'm asked about living standards. If those opposite really cared about living standards in our country and in our communities, they would have voted for electricity bill relief.
The member for Grey.
If they really cared about cost of living pressures in our community, they'd support our efforts to get wages moving again. If they really cared about cost of living pressures in our communities, Mr Speaker, they'd support our efforts to clean up the mess that they made of the budget. When we came to office, Mr Speaker, there was a deficit of $78 billion. By the end of our first year in office, that had become a $22 billion surplus. Mr Speaker, that $100 billion turnaround is the biggest nominal turnaround in the budget in the history of the Commonwealth, Mr Speaker. And it shows that when we came to office, when the Shadow Treasurer was busily trying to hide price rises in the economy and the electricity market, as the Energy Minister said a moment ago, when he was one of the worst-performing ministers in one of the worst governments since Federation, he handed to us, and they handed to us, real wages going backwards, inflation absolutely galloping. There was debt and deficit as far as the eye can see. We were paying far too much to service the debt that they left behind, the $1 trillion of Liberal debt. Now, we are under no illusions, Mr Speaker, about the challenges in the economy. We know our economy is slowing. I said that when the national accounts came out. I also pointed out in per capita terms that it happened on 6 different occasions under those opposite, that the economy went backwards in per capita terms.
Order.
It happened in 6 different occasions, Mr Speaker. He really should understand that before he asks a question like that. I'll see him in 7 months.
Order. The member for Hume will cease interjecting, or he'll be warned. The member for Hume, I just said cease interjecting, and don't respond. Don't say anything. Trust me. And the Treasurer will also stop interjecting. So I can hear from the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to build a better and fairer school education system in the Northern Territory?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my good friend, the sensational member for Solomon, for his question. The Northern Territory has some of the most disadvantaged communities in the country, and it also has at the moment the most underfunded schools in the country. At the moment they're funded at less than 80% of what David Gonski said they should be. In other words, 1 in 5 kids in class in the Northern Territory today aren't being funded at all. In other words, they're not getting the support they need and that other children take for granted to learn to read and write and finish school. And until last week, that wasn't supposed to be fixed until 2050. That's the date when they were expected to hit 100% of what David Gonski said they needed. What we announced last week is that we are bringing this forward by more than 20 years. To do that, we're going to double Commonwealth government funding to public schools in the Northern Territory. Mr Speaker, this is the biggest new investment in schools in the Northern Territory by the Commonwealth government ever. Ever. And it is not a blank cheque. As I've said here and elsewhere, we are going to tie this funding to the sort of things that help children who fall behind to catch up and keep up and finish school and then hopefully go on to TAFE or to university. It's also part of a bigger plan with every state and every territory to fund all public schools properly, where the Australian government chips in and where the states chip in, just like the Northern Territory government has chipped in, and where we tie this funding to real reforms. But the Northern Territory is different. The disadvantage there is bigger and the challenge is bigger. Today, right around the country, children are doing NAPLAN tests. And if the last few years are a guide, then 1 in 10 of the children sitting those tests won't meet the minimum standards that we set for them. In the Northern Territory, it'll be 1 in 3 children who won't meet those standards. So the challenge is huge. That's why what we announced last week is so important. Because if we're serious about helping those children who are falling behind, who are behind, then this is what we've got to do. Fund the schools that they go to properly and tie that funding to the sort of things that help those children who fall behind to catch up and keep up and finish school. And that includes things like catch-up tutoring. We want to build a country where no one's held back and no one is left behind. And they're not just words, they are backed by action. And that's what this $1 billion investment in Northern Territory schools is all about. Mr Speaker, this will be a game-changer for the Northern Territory and a life-changer for the children who live there.
The call to the Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. The minister has previously applauded Lucas Heights as, quote, the home of Australia's nuclear capabilities, and in 2023 he declared, quote, Australia will celebrate 70 years of safe and practical stewardship of nuclear reactors and associated technologies. Can the minister inform the House where the nuclear waste from Lucas Heights is stored?
Order. The member for Grey will leave the chamber under 94A. Was on a warning. There to be no interjections while people are approaching the dispatch box, just as there to be no interjections while people are asking questions as well. Order. The Minister for Industry and Science has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. As the Deputy Leader of the Opposition knows, this has been a long-running issue, some of that waste being stored on-site while we're waiting to actually find a location to store it long-term. You heralded in the last parliament a proposed solution about how this would all work out, and then the courts found that that was all non-workable and it was all stuffed up, all as a result of those opposite. All a result of those opposite. We are currently, ANSTO has informed me that they are quite able to store in the short term those low levels of radioactive waste, while a longer-term answer is found. And we would certainly welcome, but are not holding our breaths, for a bipartisan response or an approach to that. But in the absence of that, we will get the job done.
Order. Give the call. Order. Order. When the House comes to order, the Minister for the Environment will cease interjecting before I ask a question. So will the Leader of the Opposition. Order. We're just going to have the chamber return to order so I can hear from the member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What does the Independent Reserve Bank's decision on interest rates mean for the economy?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the wonderful member for Chisholm for her question. The Independent Reserve Bank has kept rates on hold at 4.35%, and they've pointed to the fact that inflation is moderating in line with their forecasts. Interest rates have now been on hold for more than 4 months. By the time that the Reserve Bank Board next meets, that will have been 6 months without an interest rate hike. This gives homeowners and small businesses some of the certainty that they need and deserve in difficult times. It's a reflection of
the Treasurer will pause. The member for Fisher has interjected around 18 times between yesterday and today. He's warned, and he won't interject. I know he's packing up, but he can be a lesson, be a beacon of hope to everyone by not interjecting for the remainder of this question and every other question. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This decision is a reflection of the good progress that we are making as a country in the fight against inflation. It gives us confidence that inflation is moderating in welcome and encouraging ways. Inflation has come off very substantially since its peaks in 2022. And as I said a moment ago, in quarterly terms, inflation is now around a third of what we inherited from those opposite. And we know from the Australian Bureau of Statistics that our policies are contributing to that moderation in inflation. We've got the budget restraint, which has given us the first surplus in 15 years, but we also know that the combination of our policy on electricity bill relief, early childhood education and rent assistance has also taken about half a percentage point off the CPI. Now, we also know, Mr Speaker, that it's not anything like mission accomplished because people are still under considerable cost of living pressure. This is why our cost of living relief, including our tax cuts, is so important, and it's why it has been designed to take the pressure off inflation rather than add to these inflationary pressures. And it's also why we've ensured that we can fund tens of billions of dollars in cost of living help at the same time as we clean up the mess that those opposite left behind in the budget. So people are under pressure, Mr Speaker, we acknowledge that. But because of our efforts, people are earning more, they are keeping more of what they earn, inflation is moderating, the budget is in better nick, and the default market offer, as the Energy Minister said a moment ago, shows price reductions in the electricity market. Now, the Reserve Bank Governor has said before that our efforts in the budget have been very positive and very helpful in this fight against inflation. And the Governor will have an opportunity to expand on and explain the decision that they've just taken today because of the press conferences that Governor Bullock has undertaken to do after each decision. I think this is a really good change. It has been well supported and it has been well received. It's one of a number of really important initiatives that came out of the Reserve Bank review undertaken by this government, and I encourage the parliament to support the other review recommendations as well.
Honourable Member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. When will the government announce where the nuclear waste and end-of-life reactors of the nuclear submarines will be stored? Can the minister rule out any state or territory?
Call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
You won't be alive.
Order.
Well, I thank the
Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. The answer to the second part of the question first is we won't rule out any state or territory. But in answer to the first part of the question, the first nuclear reactor that we will need to be dealing with comes into play in about the 2050s. So we do have time in which to go through a process by which we determine where that nuclear waste will be stored. Now, part of being a responsible nuclear steward in the context of AUKUS is that we take responsibility for the full nuclear cycle, which includes the disposal of the reactors. We take that very seriously. We have indicated that we will go through an exhaustive process to assess where that will occur. The one statement that we've made to this point in time about where is that it will happen on the current or future defence estate.
The call to the honourable member for Lingiari.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Resources. Minister, how is the Albanese Labor government supporting Australia's critical mineral industry to boost the economy and support more jobs and opportunities for Australians?
The call to the Minister for Northern Australia and the Minister for Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the exceptional member Ungiari for that excellent question. Mr Speaker, the Albanese Labor government is taking significant action in support of the critical minerals and rare earths industry of Australia. In Darwin last week, with many of my colleagues, I announced over $800 million of support from the Albanese government to Arafura Rare Earths to help deliver Australia's first combined integrated rare earths mine and refinery. The importance of this rare earths project cannot be underestimated. It will sit 125 kilometres north of Alice Springs. It will bring 300 new jobs and deliver $1.4 billion of benefits right across the Great Northern Territory. This is a job-creating economic boost for Alice Springs. And importantly, for the communities of Alice Springs and right across the top end, Arafura has set and is determined to meet their 20% Indigenous employment target. The project is an ambitious step forward for our rare earths and critical minerals industry. It will open up new, secure supply chains and ultimately supply 5% of global rare earth oxides. And people may well ask, Mr Speaker, what do you use rare earth oxides for? Well, they're very important to power the green energy revolution. They are integral ingredients in super-strong magnets. They go into all sorts of green technologies, including electric vehicles. They are important for everyday mobile devices and laptops. They go into defence applications. So these rare earth oxides that were produced just north of Alice Springs will be vitally important. Mr Speaker, as you know, traditional resources exports of iron ore, coal and LNG are the bedrock of our national prosperity. The new resources industry of rare earth and critical minerals builds upon this exceptional tradition and will create more opportunities right across the country. The Nolans Rare Earth financing package includes $500 million under the Critical Minerals Facility, up to $115 million on Export Finance Australia's commercial account and $200 million from the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility. And this financing will draw in another $840 million of finance from international equivalents of our Export Finance Australia, as well as commercial banks from Germany, France, Canada and the Republic of Korea, demonstrating how important international cooperation and collaboration is to develop the rare earths industry in this country. The road to net zero runs through Australia's resources sector. The road to net zero will run through the Arafura Nolans project just north of Alice Springs in the Great Top End in the Northern Territory.
The call to the honourable member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. Last year, I welcomed the government's announcement of the $500 million housing support program to fund housing-enabling infrastructure. It's what I've been calling for almost 2 years. But now, more than 7 months later, there are no guidelines, no applications, no dollars, no new houses. When will housing support program money actually start to flow?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Can I thank the member for Indi for her question and her interest in the housing support program, and I also note her long-standing commitment to ensuring that regional communities like mine do have the housing and the infrastructure and funding that they need to thrive. I am very pleased to advise the member that it is the intention of myself and my colleague, the Minister for Housing, to open this program next week. In terms of this, it will be the first round of the program in addressing planning capacity, with the second round to be focused on infrastructure and services to be opened shortly thereafter. This program, of course, forms part of the government's commitment to addressing housing supply and affordability, and it, of course, includes the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund to support the delivery of new social and affordable rental homes, the $3 billion through the New Homes Bonus to incentivise states and territories to build 1.2 million homes, $2 billion through the Social Housing Accelerator to permanently increase the stock of social housing, the National Housing Accord, which aligns all levels of government, institutional investors and the construction sector to actually unlock housing, all initiatives of the Albanese Labor government. I'm pleased to be administering the $500 million housing support program, an important part of the Australian government's efforts. The program, of course, as you know, will provide funding for planning capability to get more housing approvals through the system more quickly and getting strategic plans in place to unlock new sites for housing investment, whether it be in Wodonga, in Benalla, in Beechworth or in Bright or anywhere else across Australia. The funding will work alongside the planning reform blueprint through which First Ministers agreed to a range of planning reforms to accelerate housing supply in well-located areas. The housing support program will also fund connections to essential services so that new housing isn't held up by delays to sewerage, to local roads and to connection to utilities. State, territory and local government have been calling for this funding, including in regional communities like the ones for the member for Indi and I represent. I'm pleased that this is a program that the Australian government is delivering, and I will welcome the applications from local government and state governments following the announcement next week.
Give the call to the honourable member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. What steps is the Albanese Labor government taking to ensure the switchover of the 3G network is done in a safer way, and how is the government supporting a resilient, safe and modern communications network?
Call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. Members may be aware that Australian 3G networks are being switched over this year, and this impacts different devices in different ways. There are devices that rely solely on 3G, including 3G-only handsets, some FPOS machines and medical alarms. 3G-only handsets won't be able to make any calls after the switchover, and that will be apparent to users. The industry has been identifying and contacting customers with these devices. However, there's also a subset of 4G handsets that use 4G for voice and data, but are configured by the manufacturer to use 3G for 000 calls. Now, this category of handset is of more concern because it won't be apparent to users that their handset can't call 000 after the switchover. They'd only discover this during an emergency. My department has been seeking information on this issue to determine the scale, the scope and the actions being taken by industry. I was recently briefed and learnt that up to 740,000 devices may be impacted. Based on this advice, and particularly the scale, I am not satisfied that adequate efforts have been made by industry to identify and inform their impacted customers. Immediate action is needed, and that's why I've tasked mobile operators to establish a new working group so industry collectively acts to improve their customer and handset identification and public information on this matter. I've asked Telstra, Optus and TPG to give me their action plans by the 25th of March and fortnightly updates, and I've told CEOs directly that consumers must have easier ways to check if their handset is affected. Mr Speaker, the government takes this issue extremely seriously and will continue to monitor the switchovers and note that options exist in law, including potential proposals to delay 3G switchovers if that is in the public interest and subject to consultation processes. Mr Speaker, Australians rightly expect the 000 service can be relied on when they need it. It's one of the most critical public interest requirements for mobile carriers. The industry is now on notice to resolve this as an absolute priority. Telecommunications should enrich people's lives and support public safety, and that's why we're investing over $2.2 billion to strengthen our networks, including mobile network resilience and much-needed technology upgrades to the NBN, enabling speed boosts and helping Australians to get more for what they pay on their telco bills. The government understands that telecommunications services are vital, and we're making it a priority to keep Australians safe, connected and informed.
You call the honourable member for Canning.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm HMAS Stirling, in my home state of Western Australia, will be the home of Australia's future nuclear reactor-powered submarine fleet? Is the Minister aware of any safety concerns for local residents?
Give a call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Absolutely hilarious.
Order. Minister.
Scary or not scary? Who did your tactics?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for his question? Yes, as the member knows, Fleet Base West, HMAS Stirling, will be the home of both Surf West and the future nuclear-powered submarine capability that Australia operates. And there will be an enormous effort in terms of putting in place safe regulation of the nuclear establishment and safety of that site. We are, of course, talking about nuclear reactors which are of a size that they will—
Order. The Minister will pause and I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. On relevance, the Minister was asked, is the Minister aware of any safety concerns for local residents?
I will listen carefully to the Deputy Prime Minister about his answer. I was hearing he was talking about the nuclear submarines, and he's got 2 minutes. Order for the remainder of the question, so he's being directly relevant, and I don't think he could be even more relevant if he tried, so I'll allow him to continue.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We are, of course, talking about a nuclear reactor of a size which will power a single machine. That's what we're talking about in terms of the nuclear reactors that are within the submarines. And we understand the sensitivity involved here and the safety that needs to be put in place. These are not nuclear reactors of the size, for example, which would power cities. These are not nuclear reactors of those
Members
size.
on my left will cease to
And of course, they do not generate the same amount of material of a nuclear reactor which might, for example, power a city. And we understand the sensitivity that would be involved in giving assurance to the Australian people about where reactors which power cities might reside and where the nuclear material that comes from those reactors would ultimately be stored. That is on a completely different scale to what we are describing in terms of a nuclear reactor which powers a single machine. Those opposite are trying to draw some comparison between them and nuclear reactors which power cities. That is the difference here. What we are doing is making sure that the nuclear establishment in respect of Australia's nuclear-powered submarines will be completely safe. What they are positing is something entirely different.
Order. Order. Keep the call. Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government addressing the gender gap in superannuation and helping to boost the retirement incomes of Australian women, and why is that boost so important?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I really appreciate the question from the member for Fremantle, who's got a deep interest in superannuation and in our efforts to close the gender gap in super. Compulsory super, Mr Speaker, is a really proud creation of the Labor government and the Labor movement. And our retirement income system is the envy of the world, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. It has its imperfections, and one of its imperfections is the gender gap when it comes to superannuation. To put it bluntly, Mr Speaker, parents and especially mums take much too big a hit when they take time off to have kids. And a combination of the gender pay gap and the super gap means that women retire with about 25% less super than men. Now, of course, we can't fix it overnight, but we are working hard to address the gender pay gap and the super gap at the same time. And that's why we are really proud to have announced that we will now be paying the super guarantee on the government paid parental leave scheme, Mr Speaker. We have said for some time that this is a priority for this Albanese Labor government, and now we will make it a reality for the mums and dads of Middle Australia. This will benefit about 180,000 families a year. It will boost retirement incomes for women. It will reduce some of the impact of interrupted work patterns. It will help make superannuation fairer. And for all of these reasons, this is not just good social policy, this is good economic policy as well. We are paying super on paid parental leave, and we are expanding and extending parental leave itself as well. And here I pay tribute to the Social Services Minister for getting the paid parental leave extension through the parliament this week. What a really proud achievement of this minister and this government. I pay tribute to her, and I pay tribute to the Assistant Treasurer. I pay tribute to Minister Gallagher, and before her, the Environment Minister. I pay tribute to the member for Newcastle and others who have campaigned for so long for this really important change, Mr Speaker. This government is all about ensuring that Australian women can earn more and keep more of what they earn and retire with more as well. Our tax cuts are better for women. Our wages policy is better for women. Our retirement incomes policy is better for women as well. And all three of these important policy areas are working together to close the pay gap and to close the superannuation gap as well. Mr Speaker, this is how we build on proud Labor legacies like paid parental leave and compulsory superannuation to deliver for mums and dads and families, for local communities and for the national economy as well.
The call to the honourable member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Tomorrow, the Greens will introduce a bill to create divestiture powers so we can finally break up the Coles and Woolworths duopoly and end the price gouging, powers that already exist in Europe and the United States. Will your government stand on the side of Australians and take on the big supermarket corporations, or will you just trot out your weak excuses about the Soviet Union and let the giant supermarkets continue to ride roughshod over Australians?
Order. The Assistant Treasurer will cease interjecting. Order. Members, order. We're not going to have interjections before a Minister or Prime Minister speaks. Just want to remind all members I could barely hear that question because of the noise, so we can just make sure questions are heard in silence, and hopefully answers will be heard in silence as well. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I've been waiting to get a question about the Soviet Union, and I've got one from the Queensland Greens. Who would have had that on their bingo card? Mr Speaker, when it comes to supermarkets, what we have done is intervene across a range of ways. Firstly, we've directed the ACCC to conduct an inquiry into supermarket prices, and we have made it very clear that the current voluntary code of conduct, if the ACCC recommend to us further mandating, then we are completely up for that, Mr Speaker. We've appointed Dr Emerson to lead a review of the Food and Grocery Code. We've partnered with Choice to provide Australian households with better information on the comparative cost of goods. We've increased penalties for anti-competitive conduct. We've banned unfair contract terms. We've introduced legislation in this House to allow designated small advocates to fast-track complaints through the ACCC, and we look forward to it being supported. We know that. The Leader of the Nationals has had some comments to say about this. He has said that the coalition were too slow, and on that we agree with the Leader of the Nationals. He has said that the Nationals wanted to move a lot quicker pace in terms of a compulsory grocery code. And I say to the Leader of the Nationals, break away. Break away. There are opportunities. There are opportunities to break from the shackles of the Liberal Party that have been holding you back for all of this time. I encourage you to break away. But I'm surprised. I'm surprised that the Nats, in breaking away, have indicated their support for the Greens political party. I didn't see that coming in spite of the colours on their how to vote.
Order. The Leader of the
National Party is now saying that the tail, instead of being at the back of the Liberal Party dog, will be there, wagging away in conjunction with the Greens. Well, what we will do, what we are doing, is putting forward, as a result of the ACCC, we will take those recommendations seriously. We will come to the Parliament. We know that there is more has to be done. We know that when a farmer gets less for their product, that should translate through to cheaper prices at the checkout. And I say to the member for interjecting, mate, you were there for 10 years. 10 years. Did absolutely nothing. We have acted more in our under 2 years than you did in a decade.
Concluded. The member for Fenner will leave the chamber under 94A. Order. Order. Wrong time, wrong place. Give a call to the member for Moreton.
That made my day, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood. How is the Albanese Labor government providing cost of living relief for Australian families accessing early childhood education? Why is cheaper childcare so important?
Call to the Honourable Minister for Early Childhood Education and Youth.
Very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the wonderful member for Moreton for his question. And Mr Speaker, 81,000 taxpayers in Moreton are getting an average tax cut of $1,554 right back into their pockets. Mr Speaker, this government, the Albanese government, is laser-focused on delivering cost of living relief for families. That's why we took action to deliver cheaper childcare last year. Reforms that increased the childcare subsidy for 1 million families right across Australia. And those reforms, according to the ACCC, reduced out-of-pocket expenses for centre-based care on average of 11%, an average of 11%. Now, more affordable early learning means that more children can access the transformational benefits of the early learning of those first 5 years, those first key 5 years that we know are so important to child development. But it also means that the primary caregiver, who is often the woman, can go back to work if she so chooses, can take on extra work if she so chooses, and can contribute to the family budget and also add to that cost of living relief. But under this government, not only will families earn more, they'll keep more. They'll keep more of what they earn. Because from the 1st of July, our tax cuts mean that every single taxpayer, that's 13.6 million Australians, will get a tax cut. 13.6 million Australians are getting a tax cut. Now, for example, Mr Speaker, a family with a household income of $120,000 a year will get a tax cut of $2,676. And thanks to our cheaper childcare reforms that lifted the childcare subsidy for them, if that family has a child in early childhood education and care, they'll get a further $1,700 back into their pockets through our cheaper childcare reforms. Now, that's real money, real cost of living relief, right back into the pockets of Australians. Now, we compare that to those opposite, who, when in office, had keeping wages low as a centrepiece of their economic reform. That was their centrepiece. That was their policy. They were very clearly proud of that being their policy. Well, we on this side want to see wages moving again. Those opposite want people to work longer for less. But we want people to earn more and to keep more of what they earn.
Call to the member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. 3 of the top 6 selling vehicles in regional Australia are made by Toyota and will cost families up to an extra $25,000 to purchase under Labor's new family car and ute tax. Toyota's Vice President of Sales, Sean Hanley, has stated it will have a profound negative impact on regional and rural Australia and that will reverberate throughout the Australian economy. Will the minister concede that the price of existing cars will increase for regional Australians?
Order. Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Order. The Minister has the call and be heard in silence.
Well, thanks very much for the question and thank you for the call, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, this is a continuation of the misinformation that those opposite like to peddle, and we will continue to point out the facts, Mr Speaker, with some support from those honourable members opposite who know the facts, like the member for Bradfield, who pointed out that the evidence from overseas was that there would be no material change in the price of any vehicle and that they would not expect any material change in the price here, Mr Speaker. That was the member for Bradfield when he actually stood for something and actually argued for reforms that he believed in, Mr Speaker, which is a change in events. Now, in relation to the question, I make a number of points. Firstly, as Farmers for Climate Action and others have pointed out, they laugh, they scoff. Anybody they disagree with, they scoff at.
The member
they scoff
for New
at
England.
Farmers for Climate Action over there, who've called exactly for these reforms and pointed out that rural and regional drivers have a lot to gain from these reforms. And I also point out in relation to price impacts, which I'm asked about by the honourable member, that the FCAI, the peak group which has made claims in this case in terms of price impacts, said on the weekend, clarified their position and said this is not a forecast on price impacts, which is a considerable change. Now, Mr Speaker, the fact of the matter is this. As we've said before, it is time for Australia to catch up with the rest of the world. These standards were introduced in the United States in 1975, in Japan in 1985, in China in 2005, in South Korea in 2006, in the European Union in 2009, in Canada, a country with similarities to Australia and differences, but Canada in 2011, Mexico in 2013, India in 2014, Saudi Arabia in 2016 and New Zealand in 2023. Now, Mr Speaker, it's also the case that those opposite could ask us why we aren't going further. Because the model that we are proposing, the Minister for Transport and I, has lesser standards than those in New Zealand and Europe. We are being less onerous in terms of what we are asking car companies to do, and also the Minister for Transport and I have been consulting widely with industry. We didn't have to do that. We could have just introduced legislation and pushed it through. We run a consultative government which listens to people, works with people and takes on board sensible suggestions as how we can best implement our policies. And that's exactly what the Minister for Transport and I have been doing, working with those in the industry who do recognise the need to bring better and more fuel-efficient cars to Australia and recognise that government leadership is important to help them do so.
The call to the Chief Government Whip.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why, Prime Minister, is the government focused on renewables with firming capacity for future energy needs? What alternatives to the government's plans have been proposed?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Chief Government Whip for her question, and indeed the government is very focused on the fact that renewables are the cheapest form
Leader of the
of
Opposition.
new energy, and that firming capacity through gas or the use of batteries will be important in driving that home. But we have had some alternatives floated, Mr Speaker. And one of those, the Leader of the Opposition's media team were round the gallery yesterday saying they were going to make a decision last night. And it was going to be announced their nuclear policy. But today he went to the party room and he said, well, there are a few details that were outstanding. Just four. Safety, disposal, cost and location. So apart from safety, apart from the disposal,
members on my right will cease interjecting.
apart from where they're going to go, it's all sorted out. Opposite. Good news, team. Good news. Other than that, everything's ready to go. Ready to rip. We just need to buy the land, pour the slab, build the walls and put the roof on, then we have a new house. Unbelievable. In fact, nuclear power is a lot like the Liberal Party, Mr Speaker. No help to anyone today, completely wrong for Australia's future and notorious for waste that takes forever to clean up. But we've been cleaning up their waste, Mr Speaker. And this farce shouldn't come as a surprise. This is a mob who thought the NBN should be built not with fibre but with copper wire. This is a mob that were promising commuter car parks where there were no train stations. It's amazing they're so opposed to turbines, Mr Speaker, when you consider how much wind they generate. Over and over again, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, the climate is changing, but they never will. They had 22 policies on energy in opposition. Now they've come up with a 23rd, but they can't land it. Couldn't land it in government, couldn't land it in opposition. The truth is, Mr Speaker, that during their decade in office, 24 of the country's coal-fired power stations announced they would close. 8 of them actually closed on their watch, in spite of the fact they had a Prime Minister who would come in here with a lump of coal saying that it was all OK, they didn't need to act. The truth is that they left a mess. They left a mess when it came to the need to have a proper energy policy. We've got one. We look forward to them announcing their policy when they sort out those 4 little issues.
Concluded. Order. Far too much noise during that. I'll give the call to the honourable member for Flinders.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. In these uncertain economic times, can the Prime Minister guarantee the millions of Australian tradies that there will be no changes to the fringe benefits tax exemption for single and dual cab utes?
Order. Give the call. Order. Members on my left. The member for Hume will see, and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Prime Minister has the call.
If you have the view that they've been advocating for week after week, that they've been doing through their proxies, through their sort of extreme right-wing little groups, funded by all those people running around during the Dunkley by-election, then there won't be any utes. That's their position. As they go forward. They say there won't be any utes. They say that it'll all go backwards. The fact is that what we have, as the member for Bradfield has repeatedly said when he was the minister, he put forward the case for the need to have proper emission standards. The
Prime Minister will pause. The member for Hume on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. It was a very specific question about fringe benefit tax on utes.
The member for the Minister for Industry and the Treasurer will cease. So will the Leader of the Opposition. Order. The member for McEwen will cease interjecting. Order. The Prime Minister. Order. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister will return to the question. Order.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I'm talking about what we are doing, not what we're not doing. What we are doing, not what we're not doing.
Order.
And what we are doing is putting forward a sensible measure.
Order.
And we're putting forward a proposition which those opposite couldn't land over a whole decade. We're putting forward a proposition which, when we were the opposition and this minister approached this shadow minister for transport, what we did was say, yes, we will provide support for this reform because it is in Australia's national interest. Because what you run appropriately on Australia's national interest is good reform, and that is what we are doing.
Order. The Manager of Opposition Business. Prime Minister will cease interjecting. The Manager of Opposition Business will cease interjecting, so I can hear from the member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How are the Albanese Labor government's workplace relations reforms helping Australians earn more after a decade of wages being kept deliberately low?
Give a call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Speaker, and I thank the member for Macon for the question and for the commitment that he shares with every member of this government that we want people to earn more and to keep more of what they earn. The question invites, and I just want to focus on one particular example because we've often gone to the big statistics in terms of what's happening with real wages now returning in terms of growth, or what's been happening with the gender pay gap getting to its lowest level ever. But I want to just focus on one employer and one set of laws and what changed on laws that this side supported and those opposite opposed. And that's the change that went through in Secure Jobs Better Pay, which was to abolish the zombie agreements. Now, this article came out when Parliament wasn't sitting, but I think we should refer to it. It was by David Murray Guzman in the Financial Review. It was at the end of last year, and it referred to a labour hire company called AWX, which is a subsidiary of People In. Now, that labour hire company had an old zombie agreement that dated back to 2004. So when we've talked about zombie agreements before, we've talked about them in the context that this means this particular company had an unfair advantage against their competitors. But when a labour hire company has a zombie agreement, it means they can go to every single workplace and offer rates of pay that are not only below an enterprise agreement, but below what the award rate had become. So for this particular subsidiary, the Sunday penalty rate— now they covered people in the restaurant industry award— the Sunday penalty rate that they were able to offer was $12 an hour less than the award rate of pay. $12 an hour less on a Sunday than the minimum rate of pay for an award. Now, you can imagine what that meant, as they could go from business to business, and even if you didn't have an enterprise agreement, if an employer was paying the lowest amount that was meant to be the legal minimum, this labour hire company could come in and could say, we can undercut that. Now, that principle, we had argued that needed to be fixed in opposition. Those opposite voted against it when they were in government. They voted against it when they are now that they're in opposition. It meant that people were able to be paid $160 a week less than if they were directly employed. When those opposites say, as the Leader of the Opposition has said, that they will have a targeted package of reforms on industrial relations, we know exactly who it's targeted against. Targeted against casuals, targeted against job security, targeted against closing the gender pay gap, targeted against ordinary Australian workers.
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I ask further questions placed on the notice paper.